So, what's the deal with projector sewing anyway? This is the question I had to ask myself when I went to go and print 50 pages of another PDF pattern. So, I decided to dip my toe a little bit into projector sewing, and as you will see in this video, I kind of dove into the deep end. What are you gonna do? Number one, I was getting increasingly more irritated every time I needed to print out a paper pattern. A level of friction that I started to feel because I knew that I would have to tape together a PDF pattern for like at least 45 minutes. If it's like a small pattern, if it's like a huge bias cut dress, forget about it. Number two, my partner was getting a little irritated and annoyed by my printer usage because I'd be going in and like using all the ink, using all the printer paper, and it's just not sustainable. Number three, I have a huge problem with storing PDF patterns. I already have a pretty small studio space, and my closet is also very small in my studio space. Whenever you tape together pieces of copy paper and then fold them, you inevitably get these like weird indents. They're really hard to straighten out. And unless you're literally laminating your PDF patterns with tape, they're just not nice to work with. And honestly, you guys know if you've been watching my channel that for me, sewing is all about gravitating towards the craft. And PDF patterns were becoming a huge friction point for me. I bought the Mag Cubic Mini for $90. This was one of the models that projectorsewing.com recommended. It's like in their recommended products list. I'll link it down in the description. I had considered like one of those big Epson short throw ones that the sewing girlies really seem to love here on YouTube, but I don't have enough surface area for that. Also, don't really have a light stand that's particularly strong enough for something that heavy. I opted for a smaller one that would have to be mounted in some way. It has 1080p native resolution, Bluetooth for mirroring devices, auto focusing, comes with a remote, and a minimum throw distance of 4 feet, which is all that really matters like in this context. It has a lot of other features, but I don't care about those other features. Straight out the box, it works great. So I'm annoyed that I have to have yet another possible security risk connected to my home network. It does connect to my laptop like pretty seamlessly, which is a huge plus for installation. Once I got it open and I plugged it in, I realized I had no idea what I was doing. I did very little research. I had no idea where I was going to mount it. I had no idea how I was going to mount it. I just bought this thing, not recommended. I just tried putting it up on a light stand and projecting it on the floor, but I didn't like the way that it looked, and I don't have enough plugs to support that setup anyway in my studio. At one point, I just shot it up at the ceiling to try and get the configuration correct, but I really could not figure out how to orient this thing in my space. It was really frustrating. Then I had a breakthrough, okay? I stuck it in between the wall and the pegboard. This projected okay onto my cutting board, but ultimately was at too much of an angle to be useful to me. I was able to get a much better grasp or idea about how I wanted this projector to function in my space. Then I remember that I have TV mounts for the wall that we don't use anymore. I had to remove the TV mount part, but then it was just, something I could mount something else to. And at this point, I really didn't want to spend any more money. So I began truly shopping my stash of old hardware and nuts and bolts from a bunch of like IKEA furniture and Amazon furniture that I bought, and was able to find some pretty good options. So after rummaging, I found some old brackets for window blinds. I used that L bracket and some old knobs that I found. I have no idea where these knobs are from, but they fit in the thread of the projector. The little knobs, though, were a little bit too long to fit into the projector and through the L bracket without there being a significant amount of space between the L bracket and the projector. So to avoid it swiveling around everywhere, I needed some kind of washer. Unfortunately, I did not have any that were the correct size, but I did find this oddly shaped shim that I can assume were from like some weird thing that I took apart. Then I did a big no-no and I installed the TV mount directly into the drywall. Um, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to find a stud and put it in a stud. But here's my like my mindset behind this. My mindset is that it's a TV mount for a TV, which is why they want you to put it in a stud because TVs are very, very heavy. But the projector is less than 2 pounds. And honestly, once I installed it into the drywall and I, gave it a good little wiggle, it's not going anywhere. And I'm not going to attach anything heavier than 2 to 3 pounds. So I'm not worried about it. It's staying up there with hopes and dreams, and if something changes, I will let you know. At this point, it looked pretty good. But whenever I was projecting my pattern for the first time, I noticed that there was a lot of blurriness. And I did some Googling, some research, and I saw that that can happen when your projector is using you've moved too many keystones on your projector, whatever that means. So you need to try to make it more level. And upon getting a ladder and putting a level on there, it was quite unlevel. So clearly my little oddly shaped shim was not going to work for this project. So I went digging around again and I wanted up finding these perfect little plastic washers. Unfortunately, the hole was a little bit too small, but I was like, it's plastic, so there has to be some kind of, plasticity to it. So I took a drill and I started to kind of drill on that. That was a bad idea. Don't do that. I literally felt like I was going to drill through my hand at any moment, and it didn't make a dent in the washers. So then I got out my soldering iron, which I use very rarely, but when you do need it, it is very useful. And then I did yet again a very big no-no, I would say, and I just started soldering plastic. Now, I'm actually going to highly recommend you don't do something stupid like this. It smelled like cancer. Okay? It smelled like cancer. I regret it. It was not a good idea. Let's move on. I don't want to hear about this in the comments. But this winded up working great. I made two, but I only needed one, and they were the perfect height for the gap in between the L bracket and the projector. And it winded up looking pretty tidy and it was super level at the end of the day. Lastly, since it is so high up, and one con I immediately noticed about this projector is that the power cord is really short. Considering that you're probably going to have to mount it somewhere, I'm like, that's kind of like not good design, I think. But it's fine. I have an extension cord and I just screwed a hook into the wall and hung it on the wall. Does it look good? No. But I don't keep it plugged in and it's fine. It's fine. The first time I truly used this is once the sun was down, so it was nice and bright. Surprisingly bright, actually. I was able to see everything very clearly. It had very minimal blurring because I had worked really hard to make it super level. Calibrating was super easy with this free sewing projection tool, which I will also link in the description. And there are like lots of tutorials online about it. It was like way easier than I thought. So if you're someone who's like really doubting that you can calibrate something, it was super easy. Since I've never done this before, I really wanted to try a variety of different cutting and tracing methods with my first time cutting something out. All in all, I tried like 7 to 8 different methods while cutting out a pattern for a lined jacket, which was honestly like probably the best project I could have started with this projector because there are so many pieces and there's like a lot to keep track of. So it's kind of like the right amount of challenge for using this for the first time. First, I tried my rotary cutter and it was okay. Hot take, I don't love using a rotary cutter to cut out pattern pieces. I think it can be really useful for use with guides like a stripology ruler or really long, straight, or slightly curved lines. But I find I have less control of the fabric with a rotary cutter. Like I find that there's a lot of buckling whenever you use a rotary cutter. But I didn't mark anything in this first try. All I did was mark like the pattern markings that I knew I couldn't use a rotary cutter to cut out. And this was fine. Again, I don't love using a rotary cutter, but that's not a projector problem. That's my personal preference for my practice kind of problem. Next, I tried just using my regular fabric shears, which I knew was going to be a problem because so many people said it was going to be a problem, but I still was like, I have to see it for myself. I'm one of those people where I have to see the problem for myself before I believe it. I prefer using fabric shears. So I thought maybe I could just see if it works for me. Maybe I'm different. Maybe I'm different, I say, as light behaves the same for everyone. And I have to say, I would not recommend this method because whenever you lift the fabric a bit, the line of the pattern changes because, light. So I winded up just tracing the pattern with chalk and then just cutting with the fabric shears after. And actually, once you trace out the pattern and then use the scissors, you can see really clearly how just the slight lifting of the fabric messes with where the light of the projection lays. And so it messes up your cutting line. This winded up being pretty much my favorite method. I thought it was really delightful to be able to trace the pattern on the fabric. I stayed with this method for a majority of this cutting project, although I did touch on other methodologies that I thought might work. I would occasionally go back to the rotary cutter, but only for smaller pieces and pieces that weren't a super complex shape, like patch pockets, and this pattern just so happened to have 2 or 3 patch pockets that needed to be cut out. And again, like this could definitely just be a skill issue in the sense that I can use the rotary cutter for smaller pieces, but need to learn that dexterity for the larger line cutting and stuff like that. One major con that I ran into was that because it's all digital, I didn't realize that when I'm physically cutting out a pattern, I'm making little piles of the pattern pieces, like as I trace them or as I cut them out, and I'm putting them to the side, putting them in piles where this one needs to be cut again, or this one needs to be cut with lining, And whenever you're using the digital pattern, you really have to rely on organizational skills to make sure you're cutting everything out and also make sure you're cutting everything out with the right fabric. So I winded up using a little postcard or a little note card and just marking down everything I needed with the fabric and just checking it off as I went. It's not a big deal. You just have to be a little bit more organized, especially for me. I get very distracted. So I think I had to be a little bit more intentional with how I was using my time while cutting out these pattern pieces. When I started to cut out the main fabric, I started really leaning on a little flexible straight edge ruler to guide my marks because I didn't have the edges of the paper pattern. I didn't realize how much I was relying on the edge of the paper pattern to really trace. So something that I realized was you really have to have that wrist dexterity of free tracing if you decide to trace the pattern out on the fabric or on paper. I briefly tried using my electric shears. I'm trying for the life of me to love this tool, but it's just not fitting in my practice. And I ran into the same problems I ran into with the fabric shears. So it was kind of a bust, but if you like using electric shears, tracing it out and then using the electric shears, no problem. So one major con that I found, and maybe I just didn't want to fuss with it, so it's not really a con, is that if one of the pattern pieces is laid out diagonally on the actual A0 pattern, you can't really rotate, at least with the software that I was using, rotate the projection 45 degrees easily. So what I wound up doing, this was a method I wanted to try anyway, was I took a piece of poster board, which is my favorite material for patterns anyway. And I just traced the collar. That was the one that was diagonally placed on the pattern. And I traced it out on the poster board and then I placed it on the fabric, the trace out, and I traced that out and then cut it like normal. And that winded up being a really delightful experience. And I think what I might do is for patterns that I know fit and I know I want to make again, I think that might be a scenario where I take the time to trace it out on cardstock or poster board. And then those are the patterns that I like put more effort into storing properly. The last thing I tried out was not cutting things out one by one. All of the smaller pieces like the patch pockets in the collar and the even the sleeve, I really piecemealed, like traced them out with the projector and then turn the light on and then cut them out with my shears. And this was really nice. I mean, it's pretty similar to just using a paper pattern, except I really liked the experience of like using my computer to place the pattern onto the fabric. It's just a different experience. I wouldn't say that it's better or worse than using a paper pattern. But again, at this point, my favorite method was tracing it out onto paper and then putting it on the actual fabric. At the end of the day, not including installation, because took me a couple of days to figure out, it took me about an hour and a half to cut out all the pattern pieces for a fully lined jacket. Is that good or bad? I don't know. I am only in my second year of sewing, so I'm not an amazing pattern cutter, but did have to like change my camera angles a few times. So like I would say like minus maybe 15 minutes. It took me maybe 60 to 75 minutes to completely cut out the pattern pieces from the moment I like opened the pattern and turned on the projector. Number one, the issues and challenges you face with cutting fabric will not magically go away because you got a projector. I've talked about this in a previous video, but cutting fabric is a skill, it's a craft, it's something that people specialize in tailor shops. It is a skill that has to be practiced and it needs to be studied and learned, and it is a hard thing to do. And I think my feelings about rotary cutting very much sums up this point that I have is like some people may be very good at using a rotary cutter, and so using a projector may be like easy peasy to them. But if you haven't learned that material literacy, if you haven't learned how to really control the fabric, a projector is not going to matter. A projector is solving a very specific problem in my workflow, and that is that I don't like taping together PDF patterns. It's not solving cutting the fabric. That's just not the problem that it's solving. And I think maybe I had a little bit of that going into it, that it would make cutting the fabric easier. So I think it's an important point to kind of talk about that's like, it's not necessarily going to fix issues you have with fabric. Number two, and this is just something about my studio space and something that I noticed, I have really pretty reddish, orangish, pinkish, like translucent curtains. I think I'm going to move to some blackout curtains. I have blackout curtains in the rest of my home, but I thought it would be nice to have like translucent ones in my studio space. And I think I would. The projector does work okay during the day, but I think that I want the option to have that really nice experience with the projector during the day. So a little studio update that might happen. Curtains are not like that expensive anymore, so we'll see. Maybe I'll go to IKEA and get some better curtains for this. Number three, this is not related to sewing at all. With the saga of trying to install this thing, I can't help but feel like a 3D printer might be kind of cool. I was like kept thinking like it would be so cool to just quickly design a little bracket for this to actually install it on the ceiling. Although I'm super happy with the setup that I have right now. It's at the perfect height and it makes sense and it looks cool and it's fine. You know what I mean? But I think it would be kind of cool to use a 3D printer. And I've been watching a lot of 3D printing content lately. And I have this like idea to 3D print a hand sewing button jig. It's like in my head and I like drew it out and I'm like, "Oh, that would be just so cool." It's like been 3D printing has been on my mind. I don't know. Four, lastly, one of my major fears with using a projector for patterns is that I won't be able to adjust my patterns by hand anymore. Obviously, that's not really a concern if I trace the pattern to a piece of paper and then do paper pattern making. But I think with the goal of saving paper and being more sustainable, I have to learn digital pattern making. And I was really delighted. I opened up one of my patterns in Inkscape, which is like free Adobe Illustrator, and it had all the paths and they were all editable. And it got my mind moving into this space of like, okay, I need to learn digital pattern making. And It's also a lot from you guys, my subscribers, like hearing you talk about pattern making, because I did a video on patterns, and also in my really popular video, you guys were just like, you need to learn pattern making. Stop playing around. So I'm having this feeling more and more of like, in order to get where I want to go with this practice, I need to learn some very real pattern making skills and doing it digitally as well. Well, if you're still watching this, you're fucking awesome. Please consider subscribing, liking, commenting, anything to help the algorithm and help me sew full time. That's what I want to do, and that's why I have this YouTube channel. Okay, bye. If you can hear me, are you going to judge me?
No, babe, I'm just trying to make a grilled cheese.